Hello and welcome to the Blockade Runner podcast number 264. My name is John. Joining me as always is Ryan. What's up, Ryan?
Hey, good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. So the Acolyte episode 3 just debuted last night, and so we're going to devote this week's episode, today's episode, to, of course, discussing Destiny, the is it a squad-based shooter, Destiny? Is it how do you describe the game Destiny? Like an online, the look on your face says you don't know what I'm talking about,
Are
right?
we talking about Destiny or Destiny 2, or are we talking about the most recent expansion for Destiny 2, The Final Shape?
I thought we'd talk about all of those.
Okay, we'll start with the beginning and talk some Destiny lore.
Yeah, no, we're not going to do that.
Okay.
There was a time where our friend Dan was all about Destiny, and it came up constantly, Ryan. So it was a big staple in conversations for years. I don't think he's playing all the time, but I did see that there is new DLC for Destiny. But no, we're going to talk about Destiny Episode 3 of The Acolyte, which debuted last night on Disney+, and so it's less than 24 hours old at the time of this recording, and we're going to dig into it, okay?
Okay.
So, obviously, our last episode was all about the 2-episode premiere of The Acolyte, and we devoted that episode to, kind of gushing over how much we love the show and how exciting it was and what a mystery it was. And we were really excited for this week's episode. I know I was. And this episode was a little bit of a swerve to an extent. It was not what I expected following the 2-week premiere or 2-episode premiere last week.
It was
which is
not what you expected?
No, it was not what I expected.
When we literally, shout out to us on the last episode, we're like, yeah, they're probably going to do a flashback episode to have younger versions of the Jedi, and that would be, an excuse to bring Carrie-Anne Moss back. And, we predicted exactly this episode.
But I don't think... Well, okay. I think that's a little bit of a revisionist history, Ryan. Maybe maybe you have a little bit in common with the Jedi themselves. You know what I mean? Where you are presenting the best version of events. You know what I mean? I'm gonna do the other Rashomon kind of interpretation of what we said, which I think we said we'd be seeing those Jedi some more in flashbacks, and that we would get more flashback content in this show. I at least personally don't think that. I know I didn't say next week's episode it's going to be the big flashback episode. In fact, I was like,
not exactly, yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I was like, they left off with the cliffhanger kind of there's Kelnaka, and that's where May's going to kill Kelnaka, and I thought the story would keep pushing forward. In the 3rd episode, I didn't expect it to completely halt. I mean, we don't see 1 second of the current timeline in episode 3. It is 100% devoted to the past. And so we'll talk about that. I mean, I like the episode, but it's not what I expected to see this week personally,
Yeah, I would say the entire time I was watching this episode, it started and I was like, hey, they're doing the thing that we said they were going to do. This will be a cool cold open 5-minute sequence to, explain what went down. And then 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour, and I'm like, oh, this is the whole episode. They're just doing this.
Yeah. So, because just in terms of approach or possible, ways of doing what the show is now doing, I think obviously this flashback content could have been kind of, we could have seen scenes like this throughout a few episodes, kind of cutting back and forth rather than just a full-on flashback episode. But, I don't know, if that would necessarily be a better approach or not. I think this is fine. But it's one of those things where with a show like this, I feel like, every week, like I'm all excited. It's Tuesday night. We're getting the new episode of The Acolyte. I can't wait to see what happens. And I think this is a very valuable episode. I think it's important to the narrative. I think it needs to be part of the show. And I think it's very good, but it did not quite quench that, like, oh yeah, let's see what's going to happen next in The Acolyte, type excitement I had after coming out of last week's episode.
Yeah, I found it to be a major hype deflator.
Okay.
And,
all right. Okay.
Like, I got to the end of the episode, and I was like, oh god, are they going to do another one of these next week?
Okay, so you hate The Acolyte, Ryan, is what you're telling me. You hate The Acolyte, and you hate episode 3. This is the worst show.
I feel like this was an incredibly weak episode of both the show and Star Wars television in general. It's one of the worst Star Wars TV show episodes I've seen. Not to say there's not redeeming qualities about it, but like, if I was like not all in on Star Wars, and if I was like a casual viewer who like checks out some of the shows and was like, hey, this Acolyte, pretty cool, I like those first 2 episodes, and then I got hit with this episode, I'd probably be like, I have other things I can do with my time. There are 7,000 other TV shows to watch. Like, I will just bail. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But well, I am an all-in on Star Wars person, so I'm going to continue watching, and I still think the show is going to end up good eventually, but this was a 15-minute story, bloated and redundant, to like a 45 minutes of 30 minutes of wasting my time.
Wow, I did not know you were going to come in so strong with this.
Dude, this episode sucked.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I did not feel that way. I liked it. I've watched it twice now, and I like the episode. I think it's good. I don't think it sucks, but that's okay. It's kind of nice that we have differing opinions here this week. I think that will make for a good conversation. So, maybe Ryan, will it change your mind if I tell you this one was directed by Kogonada? Would that impact you at all, do you think?
Sorry, you cut out there for a minute. What were you asking?
Oh, hopefully I'm not having internet issues. Kogonada. It was directed by Kogonada. I thought maybe that would turn you around on the episode.
No, it was wild to see that. Like, I didn't know who that director was going into this. Like,
yeah, me neither.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't think this episode really like reeked of strong artistic sensibilities.
Well, I told my son Owen, who is familiar with that director, this morning. I was like, "Hey, this week's episode," because he was pretty lukewarm to uninterested in the show after watching the 2-episode premiere last week. But I caught him when I put it on last week. We were going to watch it together as a family. I caught him trying to put an AirPod into his ear before the thing even started. So when I tell you that, like, he comes to it with a negative attitude, expecting not to like it. He comes to it with a negative attitude, expecting not to like it. But anyway, this morning I was like, "Hey, Kogonada,"
expecting not to watch it.
yeah. But his film teacher had let him borrow a movie by this director named, I think it's called Columbus, that he watched and really liked. And I told him it was directed by Kogonada, assuming I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he was like, "Oh, well, he's known for, like," I forget how he put it, but basically like kind of slow-paced, dialogue-heavy, relationship, conversation type filmmaking, so that kind of tracks with the sort of episode that we got here, I think. But anyway, all right, so Ryan, not a fan, but we're going to dig into it a little bit here and talk about some of the ideas in the episode and kind of run through it. I watched it this morning, and then I watched it again this afternoon so I could kind of take some notes and I thought the dialogue's pretty strong throughout the episode, and there were definitely some direct quotes I wanted to have ready to pull up here as we discuss the episode. So anyway, it opens up on Brendok, so that is the planet that May and Osha are from or live on with their coven. And so, we had seen Mother Anastasia in the trailer, and I think a lot of people were excited for that element of the show, to have this coven. And they're not night witches exactly, I don't think, or if they are night witches, it's like a different sort of group of them than the ones we've seen before in stuff like the Clone Wars. That's not a strong area of knowledge for me, but does that sound right to you?
Yeah.
I mean, this is also, I guess, like 100 years earlier or something before the stories that we're familiar with. So that maybe is part of it too. Maybe the Night Witches are the extension or descendants of this. I'm not sure, but anyway, they live on this planet Brendok with their coven, Mother Anastasia, and then also Mother Coral with a K. I saw on StarWars.com, but Mother Coral. So those are their parents. And did you feel like they had sort of the good cop, bad cop kind of vibe going on as parents to Osha and May, Ryan?
I don't know. I feel like we knew that Osha and May had mothers. That was something that was mentioned in a previous episode, which is cool. I felt like there was very little chemistry between them. It was like hard to tell that they were even like in a relationship. I think compared to like the relationships we saw in like Andor, and it was like it's a very strange dynamic between them. Like one's obviously leading this coven, and the other one is like just like a teacher, or just like a regular witch. So yeah, I mean, I just like,
well, there was the scene early on where they kind of like Mother Anastasia and Mother Coral were in that sort of like hallway or whatever, or that little nook, and Mother Anastasia was trying to be all affectionate towards her and like stroking her cheek and all that. And I thought, for Disney Plus and a Star Wars TV show, that made it pretty clear that they are in a romantic relationship together, right?
Well, yeah, I mean it was clear, like they're yeah, like they're. I mean,
well, I'm just saying like that. Okay, well, I would take it a step further than I guess, or continue that thought that it made it clear that they were together in a relationship. But then I think that the majority of the rest of the episode was an example of how difficult it can be for two people to parent, especially when they're not on the same page in terms of like how to handle that job of parenting, And so like, I think, yeah, I like what you described as a lack of chemistry. I think I interpret it as like, these are two people who love each other and are in a relationship, but there's this source of conflict between them because it's really stressful to raise children, and they are not like, they are not a united front. They are not like on the same page together as parents. And that, I think, that's gonna make a relationship difficult.
Yeah, I think it was hard. I wasn't entirely convinced that they loved each other, I guess.
Okay.
Like it almost seemed like they were just two people who were, like two teachers with different philosophies, more than in a romantic relationship. I wish they would have like leaned into that a little bit more.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Fair enough. A question for you that I wrote down while we were watching the episodes is, or while I was watching it, how many spice creams did you eat while watching this episode? Or if you did not have any spice creams, how many do you want to have after this podcast recording?
Okay, so I think this might be a good. I'm not answering your in universe question here.
Okay.
I think
it's out of universe too, because the recipe is on StarWars.com right now. So I'm just saying, like, you can make a spice cream. Well, I mean,
so this is like a tricky topic to, I think, talk around, because I think there's a lot of really, bad faith and cruel arguments and discussions around this topic over the years, and I want to, kind of be clear of where I'm coming from with this. But I feel like historically, starting with the Phantom Menace, there has been a struggle to portray children in Star Wars. There are just many. They are given awkward dialogue that comes across awkward through a child's mouth and performance, because it's Star Wars, and it is the hardest I think the hardest type of child acting you can do, and because of it, it stands out a ton, and people really end up just being completely cruel and attacking children for the direction that they were received, and for some reason just children, for a series that was originally made for children acting in Star Wars is difficult. And I think again, we talked a few weeks ago about rewatching episode 1, being there in the theater, being I referred to it as being trapped in a room with episode 1, where you just really have to stare at the good and the bad right in front of your face. There's no looking at your phone. You're just taking it all in. You're getting hit with the episode 1 fire hose, for better or worse. And I think I've seen that movie 50 times, and I was still cringing through some of Anakin's lines, and just the lines and delivery, etc. And then obviously that's been a subject talked about to death, but then more recently with the Obi-Wan show, there was a lot of criticism around the young woman who played Leia in it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I feel like that was the best child performance in Star Wars.
She was awesome.
She was awesome. So good. And I didn't really get where people were kind of coming from with the criticisms there. I get it with Anakin, didn't get it with Leia. I do think I found the performances, delivery by May and Osha in this episode to be that same kind of awkward as Jake Lloyd as Anakin. So, and it all kind of I think it kind of started.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean,
with
I think Jake Lloyd as Anakin, there's some tough lines, or some lines that don't work super well. Yeah, I mean, I think there's some tough lines from Jake Lloyd, or some just some parts that don't work super well necessarily. But overall, I feel like I really like his performance as young Anakin. I think there's a lot of heart there, and a lot of warmth, and just he feels like a real kid to me. I love the part in the beginning documentary where they're showing the audition tapes of multiple young actors who were up for the role, and some of them are just so maybe more technically proficient, but just like so they don't feel like kids. They just seem like tiny grown-ups, you know what I mean? And they're so dramatic and all of that. And so I have I guess a little more leniency or a little more openness to kids coming across as kids. But I there were a few lines today that stuck out a little bit, like, oh, that felt a little awkward, or that wasn't, like the performances certainly I think can be criticized and critiqued, and they weren't perfect or whatever. But I think this is a really, I mean, like when they sat down, and in fact, I was thinking this as I was watching the show today, they must have worked really hard to cast these kids in this role, because when you write, an episode or a big part of a story or a show around kids, I mean, that's already, you're making things difficult for yourself because you've got to find kids that can do a great job in the role, right? So that's tough. And now, on top of that, they're twins. So now you have to find kids who are really good actors who are also twins and fit the look that you need them to fit. I mean, you're getting to a place where I would think that the search would have to be extensive, and, you'd have to really work hard to get great kids, to play these roles. And I think they did. Personally, I think these kids are really good. I don't have their names up here, but I think they were really good overall. And but yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's kids and it's kids acting, and it's yeah. I mean, I think it can be tough, right? And you probably don't expect maybe the same level of performance all the time that you would from adult actors and things like that. So, for me, I think it worked overall, but there was a few parts where it was a little awkward, or didn't totally land every line. But I was pretty impressed by them, I guess, overall.
Yeah, and I don't want to put it on, put things on the actors. I think they were committed. They did the things that they should have been doing in the scenes. I think for some reason, Star Wars just has this, it's the kind of thing that's just really hard for kids to get that, feel right, because I feel like, people are dismissive of Star Wars. It's like, oh, it's just popcorn stuff for 14-year-olds. But there is such a very specific feel to Star Wars that I think really takes a lot of media literacy to really capture how how corny are you going to be, how inspired by whatever Kurosawa film from the 50s that the director is aiming for this scene, how much of the man with no name are you bringing to the scene, there's, because it pulls from such disparate sources and kind of combines them all in this melting pot. I think it's easier for adult actors who have been, in the industry for years and have seen all of these classic films and really understand the tone and the feel to pull these things off. Whereas kids don't know Star Wars these days. 10-year-olds really don't, unless it's their parents putting it in front of them, because it's so not aimed at kids anymore, and whether it should be or shouldn't be is a whole nother debate, but this is not the things that most kids are seeking out on YouTube or watching on however kids watch things these days.
Yeah. Okay. Well, kind of like continuing here with the plot and the movement of the episode. When we're introduced to Mother Anastasia, I mean, we see that the moment we described between her and Mother Coral, but after that, they're doing a little training, and Mother Anastasia is talking about the Force, although her coven, they don't refer to it as the Force. They actually use this whole like thread metaphor or analogy to describe the Force, which I thought was pretty great. I really liked the kind of alternative take on what the Force is, and the way that was, that discussion of the thread was kind of threaded through the episode. And I thought that was really cool, actually. So
in those teasers, a lot of the dialogue showed up here.
Right. She says some call it a force and claim to use it, but we know it's not a power you wield, right? So I felt like that was a very... she was making a clear distinction between the philosophy that her coven has and the philosophy that the Jedi have, And I think it's really great and really interesting, partially because the Jedi would not see it that way. And I think that by the time the episode is over, you also, as an audience, understand that the way Mother Anastasia and this coven understand themselves and their view of life and the Force and choices and destiny and all that stuff, they're kind of lying to themselves a little bit too. Like, I think both of these groups are dogmatic but don't really want to acknowledge or recognize their own dogmatism, you know what I mean, to a certain extent. Did you feel that way too, Ryan?
Or that other philosophies could exist.
Yeah. But that's the thing.
Valid. But that's
right,
also
but
religion in general.
Yeah, sure. But that's inherent, like in her comment, some call it the Force and claim to use it, but we know it's not a power you wield. Like, we're not doing that, right? We're not putting boundaries on it. We're not giving it a name. We're not, making up these rules for it or whatever. But the second OSHA wants something that isn't predestined and defined by their customs and everything else, it's a real struggle. You know what I mean? And so I think, that was... I started watching the episode, and I was like, about 10 minutes, 15 minutes into this episode, I was like, man, I think I hate the Jedi. The Jedi suck. I think I hate the Jedi, And by the end of it, I was like, okay, so this episode is showing me that, both of these groups, both of these institutions are well-meaning. They are, doing good things, but they have these flaws that they struggle to recognize within themselves, and then they're kind of foisting some of these things onto that next generation. But I have a lot of empathy for Mother Anastasia, even Mother Coral, who was the bad cop mom, of the two. Like, she was pretty strict and hardcore. I have a lot of empathy for them. By the end of the episode, had quite a bit of empathy for the Jedi too. And I think, both groups could have made better choices throughout the episode. But yeah, I guess early on I was thinking to myself, okay, so this is going to be showing us, this is going to be an example of why the Jedi are wrong, this coven is right, but I think definitely by the end that was not the story it was trying to tell. That's my interpretation anyway.
Yeah, I remember you talking about how, going into the show and, starting the first episode, you were a little concerned with whether the show would align with, the prequels, which are, kind of right on the heels of it, with like the systemic flaws within the Jedi Order. And I think, we kind of got there by the end of the second episode, but I think it's like really stamped in this episode, like where those cracks are in the Jedi Order, and how how flawed their entire system was. And it's not just them getting into politics and all of that. It's like the entire for lack of a better term, religion and of the Jedi, it does have like a lot of these flaws. And there's like moments. There's like the moment where they're like, the Jedi don't take children. It's like, no, you absolutely do. Like, but you believe that you're not doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but I do think it's like it's an interesting thing to explore, you know, and the show the episode kind of does to an extent, because like Soul's like, no, we don't take children, you know, and then later on in the episode he tells the story of, you know, he himself kind of leaving his family. He describes it as a choice he makes, but I don't know when you're 4 if you can really make that choice or not. But you know, throughout, let's see, like, okay, so they are clearly like they're spying on this coven, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and
like
then
he's
lying
creeping around in
about
the
it
woods
and then getting caught.
yeah. Right. But when they, because it's kind of like the next thing that happens, I think it's pretty close anyways. The next thing that happens is well, actually, there's a whole ceremony and stuff we should talk about here in a second. But when the Jedi show up and they are like, hey, there's children here, we want to talk to them or whatever, you know, they make it clear, and again, this could be them deluding themselves or maybe not, but they make it clear that it's like, if these children want to test and become a Jedi, they can do that. You know what I mean? And then even when Osha, like May fails the test, and it seems like they know May and like failed the test on purpose, but they're like, yep, she failed or whatever, right? And then Osha, when Soul is talking to her, he's like, you know, before she even takes the test, he's like, do you want to take the test to become a Jedi? And then when she takes it, he's like, you know, do you want to do this? And she says that she does, you know, so it's like, I don't know, I guess, you know, do you take children? Well, I don't think personally that if May and Osha were both like, we don't want to do this, and Mother Anastasia was like, they don't want to be Jedi, that the Jedi would have been like, well, too bad, we're taking them with us, see you later. Like, I don't think they would do that personally, but I guess it remains to be seen. You seem to think that they would forcibly take those children regardless of anybody else's.
Well, they don't, you know, as we've kind of seen, the Jedi, you know, from the prequels, they don't forcibly take anything. They just manipulate situations until they get what they want. Like, that's entirely what, you know, Qui-Gon did in episode 1. Like, he didn't, like, grab Anakin by the hand and pull him onto a ship. Like, he manipulated the situation and everyone around them to, you know, get Anakin to, you know, into Coruscant to be trained, because he felt like that was the right thing to do. And I don't know if that, you know, I wouldn't say that's like malicious, but I think it probably would have been a similar sort of thing here, because that's, you know, that's kind of the frame of reference that we have for like how the Jedi, you know, get their, you know, little kid army.
Yeah, that's not really how I would interpret Qui-Gon in The Phantom Menace exactly, but you know,
He
like
didn't walk away at any point until he got
yeah,
what
but
he
at no
wanted.
point was Anakin like, I don't want to be a Jedi, and at no point was Padme like, I don't want Anakin to be a Jedi, and Qui-Gon's like, well, I'll just keep manipulating you until you change your mind. Like, that never happened. You know, like, I think from day one, Anakin was interested in that and wanted to do it. And, you know, I think, like, Qui-Gon gives him the choice, too. You know what I mean? Like, we've never seen, and even if, you know, like, that's, I guess, like, one interpretation of it is that, no, Qui-Gon was going to get what he wanted no matter what happened. But we've never seen a Star Wars story that I'm familiar with where the Jedi don't give someone a choice, or, you know, are like Ahsoka in the Tales of the Jedi episode. You know, I don't remember that much about it, like, detail-wise, but was it a thing where the Jedi were like, we're taking Ahsoka, like, too bad, you know? I don't think so.
I don't remember that one. But, like, the way I think about it is when you have, like a 7-year-old kid, and you're like, what do you want to be when you grow up? and then they're like, I want to be a cop. And then if you had like cops come to their house and be like, "Hey, do you want to be a cop right now?" And they'd be like, "Yeah." And then like, "Okay, here's a test." And then then they would take them. I think it's, of course kids are like, many kids would be like, "Yeah, I want to be you just showed me this cool lightsaber. Like, yeah, I want to be a Jedi." Like,
Yeah.
I think that's kind of part of it because, the way, they're just held as like this, mythical, cool organization that really appeals to young minds.
Well, I think the bigger flaw that I see is the insisting on total separation from the family more so than like a lack of choice for the family or the child. You know what I mean? So like that to me is the bigger issue. And like I think the problem is not that Anakin chose to go with Qui-Gon and be a Jedi, and I don't think the problem is that Osha chooses to go with and be a Jedi. I think the problem is that if you make that decision, you must renounce forever where you came from. Like that, I think that's the thing that to me is like the clear, like obviously this is wrong, and your custom or your methods are wrong in that regard. Like I think their belief that attachment has to be completely renounced is where the real issue is to me.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those points that is being belabored here in the same way it was in the prequels, is the idea that the Jedi think that is even possible is like a massive flaw, because you even see like at the in the episode 2 of the Acolyte where Soul has the hollow of Osha, and that, and the other Jedi is like, "Wait, why do you have this attachment?" And he justifies it, and it's like, well, it's okay in this case because you learn from things, and this is the good kind of attachment, which is like the same thing that Anakin kind of convinces himself of in in the prequels, and just that there is this idea that like, no, people can totally, everyone who goes to this school can completely detach themselves. And obviously we do see Jedi who do go with like zero attachments and and make it through, but like I'd argue that Luke Skywalker is not a Jedi with zero attachments, and even we would find out that Obi-Wan through the Clone Wars show that like he had some attachments as well, and I would say he has an attachment to Anakin, in addition to the Duchess or that woman, and so yeah, I think that is like kind of on display here, where like telling Osha like, okay, well, you're going to leave your moms, you can't have attachment to them, and you're going to leave your sister, you can't have attachment to her, but then like as we kind of see later on, like even though Osha's like outside of the Jedi Order, that she does still obviously have that attachment to her sister.
Well, and while we're on the subject, I mean, the theme of attachment is certainly explored in the episode, because May is so attached to Osha that she's like, I will kill you rather than let you leave. You know what I mean? So it's not like a one-sided kind of depiction of the idea of attachment either, because Mother Coral is like no matter what May want or Osha wants, doesn't want to let her go. May is like, I'll end your life before I'll let you get away from me. You know what I mean? Mother Anastasia has a much more balanced view, I think, because she's like, I mean, she does try to basically tell Osha, lie during the test so they won't
Yes.
take you away. But she's willing to talk to her about it. You know what I mean? She's willing to have a conversation. And she says, if we believe her, look, when we all get together and talk about this, we will take your wishes into consideration. And like, she has a conversation with her about it. Like, I will let you make the choice that you want to make, which is more than, you can say for some members of the coven there and of Osha's family. And I think too, like, we have to recognize the ascension ceremony as, just a sort of a similar kind of thing in comparison to the Jedi showing up and saying, look, you got to make a choice. And if you choose to come with us, it's say goodbye to everything else. Right. Well, they're having these kids that are, I don't know how old they are, 8 or 10 or whatever age they are in this episode. Like, look me in the eye with all these people surrounding you doing a weird chant and say that you are pledging yourself to this. You know what I mean? Like, it is and most religions and whatever have like similar kinds of things. I had to go through confirmation. I had to do my first communion, and then later on I had to do confirmation, which was a whole thing where I was telling my family, like, I don't want to do that, and they were like, just do it anyway. You know what I mean? Which is basically what they're doing to Osha here, right? But I mean, so it is. Yeah, I think one thing I appreciate about this episode and about the show in general and the writing here is that these themes of attachment, what does it mean to have attachment? What does it mean, for all these different characters to have the kinds of attachments or kind of connections to one another that they have, and when are those healthy and when are they not healthy? And it's not just like, I think the easy thing to do would have been like, well, we're going to show how the Jedi were flawed, and that's why by the time you get to the prequels, it's such a flawed institution, and that's why they're able to be defeated. So, you're going to have the Coven making all the right decisions and have the Coven looking like they've got the good handle on this, and then the Jedi will be the one that don't get what's going on. And it's like, that is not the show that we watched, because it is a much more complex depiction of these things where everybody in this show and in this episode makes some mistakes, and everybody has, I think, good intentions for the most part, but sometimes those good intentions are leading them to make really poor decisions. And maybe May is the exception to that, because, as I said at the end of the episode, she's like, I'll light you on fire instead of let you get away. So I'm not sure how great those intentions are, but I guess it's still coming from a place of like, I don't want to lose my sister. Yeah.
And I guess we can talk about like how the episode wraps up and like what we were supposed to take from that, because I think the kind of climax and conclusion of the episode are very, very strange, and maybe it is something where I need to like watch it again to get more out of it. But it did feel very strange. But I do want to go back to like a reoccurring theme about some of the awkwardness of this episode, and I do think the Ascension ceremony, is that what it's called?
It is.
Yeah, that was pretty awkward. I think it looked like have you seen Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat? Are you familiar with that?
No. I mean, I saw it at some point when I was like 12 or something, but I don't have much memory of it, and certainly not something I'm too fond of.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of how this ceremony felt to me, with a lot of just like doing weird hand things and hands in the air and making weird sounds and all of that. It portrayed the Coven as like insane or like primitive or something, and maybe there's some background and that this like was based on, you know, some societal or cultural thing that I just don't know and just don't have understanding of. But I was like, watching it, I was like, this is very awkward to watch, and this is like not doesn't seem like a good look in making these people seem civilized.
Okay. You know what it reminded me of is like I teach the Crucible every year, and the Crucible opens up with I don't actually watch this scene with my students, but in the film it opens up with like a whole like ceremony or ritual in the woods, and you know, like the characters they seem like overtaken by something, right? Like there's, because that's part of what it is, like, oh, you know, and obviously if you know that play, that's about, you know, like paranoia and fear and that kind of stuff. And so you know, the argument the play makes is that these kids sort of get caught up in something and then sort of convince, you know, some of them anyways, kind of convince themselves that something's happening that isn't, and whatever. It's like the power of influence of other people on one another. And so it reminded me of that. And I felt like they really did, like, in some ways, they went with some of the tropes or imagery that you would expect with like a cult. They didn't have a cauldron, but they had the moon up there, right? And they had that whole, and that's like in the logo of the Acolyte and all that stuff. And they kept cutting to that full moon type imagery or whatever, which you see a lot. Like, so it just, it reminded me of a scene from The Crucible. It reminded me, I don't know if you watched The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina or not, but there was like stuff in that looked just like this. So to me, like, it just seemed like tropey witch ritual stuff that you see all the time in these kinds of shows and stories. So that's what it reminded me of.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. But there were a few shots where I was like, oh, that's kind of odd. And then it was like the one woman kept like yelping or something in the background, which I was like, okay, it's weird, but yeah. Yeah.
It, like, I don't know. I think it was really hard to tell like what they were going for with that, because it's like it kind of got to a point where it's like, wow, it is really hard for me to take your coven seriously at this point. Like, we the Jedi need to like act as like child services here and just get both of these kids away from you, because this is yikes kind of thing.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing that I was like, and as far as the depiction or the artistic choices, the creative choices being made, I was like, I don't know if I would have gone this far. There's the chorus singing "Power of One, Power of Two, Power of Many," but like I wrote down, I made a note here, like, is that supposed to be diegetic or not? Like, I think it is, but I don't feel like I ever saw any people that were chanting that, you know, or whatever. But I'm sure that was like the idea. But like,
song playing over the video, like,
yeah. Well, there's definitely
visuals.
score. There's non-diegetic score for sure.
Yeah.
But you would think that the singing would be like, we're meant to think it's the characters on screen that are singing, that are doing that chanting. But I don't think you ever see a shot of them chanting that. So then I guess maybe it is, you know, like you said, just like a non-diegetic score, like a soundtrack song over it. But like, why do we need that? I don't know.
So what that reminded me of is when, you know, people in like 2002, you know, teenagers would get their first chance at video editing and be like, I'm going to mash up these cutscenes from Kingdom Hearts with a Linkin Park song and put it on YouTube, and it is going to be so sick, and it's going to be exactly how I feel inside right now. And yeah, that was the vibe I got from that, where I was just like, yeah, like, this is where I'm saying there are some really cool ideas in this episode that, I think are worth exploring. And, I think it is also validating to people like us who have been, who have been defending the prequels and, the themes and, kind of complexity of the Jedi Order, and what George was trying to like say and portray there. I think it was very validating for us, in like, yeah, they're, Leslie Headland also, sees that, and the story group sees that, and they are like really hammering it home. And I think that stuff is really cool, and I liked that of the episode. But then there's just all this other stuff that just feels like where they're kind of like getting lost in the sauce of like, what are you actually trying to show and tell us here? And I'm not saying that every moment in a film or TV show needs to be in service of the plot, but like there are just like multiple tangents here that I think were like pretty awkwardly executed throughout this episode that I think kind of diluted like the core concepts of the episode, which I think are really strong.
Yeah.
And I think this was just one of those moments.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the Ascension ceremony itself was definitely not my favorite part of the episode. It was a little awkward. The conversation after the Jedi leave, because like the Jedi are there, and I mean, that is interesting because they kind of they roll up like unannounced. It's a little bit threatening. They lie and say that they were just, we didn't know anybody was here. Like, no, obviously you've been spying on us. Like, but then both sides, I think, do a pretty good job of like de-escalating things, but at the same time, the Jedi make it pretty clear, like, we're not leaving without, at least testing these kids, right? But the thing that
one thing on that, the reason they came, and after they got caught in their lie of like, we didn't know there were people here, we're just checking it out, and after they get called out on that, they're like, okay, you're training kids here. And like there is that whole kind of like plot that like the implication being like the only people who can train kids are the Jedi. Train kids in
the
mystical
Force
powers and stuff are the Jedi. Like, it's like, we're the state, and the homeschooling that you're doing here does not align with the Common Core standards, and we're gonna shut you down.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. And Mother Anastasia has the quote that's like, this isn't about good or bad, it's about power and who gets to use it, and
Great line.
that is what it's about. Yeah. And so, sure, I mean, obviously that's hubris and arrogance that, the Jedi are like, well, we own the Force, we get to decide, and nobody else gets to train kids in using the Force or whatever. That's not good, ultimately. And also a flaw in the Jedi and the Republic and whatever. But, then the other side of it is like, so like if the Republic knew, or the Jedi knew that like Darth Sidious was out there training Darth Maul to be a Sith, are they going to be like, oh, well, that's cool, like we just let him do that, or whatever, because like that wouldn't be good either, right? So and Mother Anastasia says earlier in the episode that they almost were extinct or whatever because, I have it actually. Let me see what exactly she said. They're almost extinct because of persecution by those who considered their power dark. And I thought that was an interesting line. I was like, so is that the Republic? Is that the Jedi? She doesn't necessarily say that, but did the Jedi almost wipe them out? I don't know. I don't know. So yeah, I certainly don't think like I'm not arguing like, oh, it's a good rule that the Republic has that, they decided, the Jedi are condoned and they can do what they want, but nobody else can, use the Force. Like that is certainly a flaw. But I can see where also it's something they'd want to keep an eye on, because if you have like, super evil groups training kids to be evil superheroes, you know what I mean? That would be something I think an institution, a government, whatever, would want to be aware of too, right?
Yeah, and I think like this really solidifies the the role of the Jedi at this point in the timeline. Is they they are they're cops. Like they're, very spiritual cops.
Yeah.
Who are you know they're like religious warriors in a way, like a religious government. They're agents of, like, the Republic is like a secular institution from what we've seen of how the Republic operates. But then these are like the holy warriors who like also have their like religion, but they also are policing, which is just a very strange but like compelling dynamic.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I guess, like, maybe I think you maybe used the verb solidifying there, but yeah, I guess, like, because it's nothing new, right? It's what
No.
we already saw in the prequels, but you're saying it's just like further like clarifying or demonstrating that that's what they are.
Stamping that, because I think something that we've found arguing with people for the past 25 years is that many people didn't take that away from the prequels and the Phantom Menace in particular. Like they didn't really like catch that theme. So and this is like another conversation, but like I feel like this is intentionally stamping this and like these flaws in like the Jedi system. This is all leading up to, I think, what we're going to get in the rebuilding of the Jedi Order. I think it's everything that it started back here. These are the flaws. In The Last Jedi, Luke names these flaws and kind of, obviously in the next film, like, kind of makes Rey the steward of the next like generation and like rebooting the Jedi Order. And I think all of this is kind of like playing into that.
Yeah, but at the risk of being like one of those people that misses the point of the prequels or whatever, I feel like the primary flaw is the rigidity and the fact that they buy so much into their own hype and their own, like they fail to see that they can be flawed and that they can make mistakes, and they I think like that's where the big issue is. And I think obviously, like, before the prequels, I wasn't envisioning the Jedi as like an arm of the federal government or whatever, and I don't think that's like the best like version or like realization of what the Jedi Order could be. But at the same time too, like I wouldn't go so far, I don't think personally, as to say like, well, the big issue, the big problem that the Jedi have is that they align themselves with the Republic, especially knowing how much of a good guy, bad guy type story Star Wars is. Like, you have the Republic and then you have the Empire, and the Empire needs to be defeated. And like, I think like the story of the prequels is like how the Jedi ended up so so arrogant that they were blinded to their own flaws, and they were blinded to the actual threats that were, present, and that the, like the yeah. So anyway, like I don't know. Yeah. I think them being associated with the Republic, is not necessarily the big critique. It's like, it's more like, and just in the same way that when you look at the Senate and the Republic in the prequels, I don't think the fact that the Republic exists is the thing that George is criticizing. I think it's like the path that they end up taking as a Republic, and the way they get, bogged down in bureaucracy and greed and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's what the issue is there. So yeah, I don't know. Like, yeah, I guess that's interesting, especially when you frame it in terms of like, what will the new Jedi Order that Rey puts together be, and how will they? Are they going to be like, well, we're agnostic. We're not going to associate with any governments. We're not going to associate with any like larger forces. I think certainly the more romantic and the more interesting version of like the Jedi Order would be sort of these wandering Ronin type, like, that's why I'm always saying, like, I don't need to see 50 Jedi on screen together. I hate that. You know what I mean? I'm not into that myself. And the way we see the Jedi here and in the prequels is like, it's this big organization, and they have to have meetings all the time, and there's rules, and like there's a hierarchy of power and all that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, I don't think any of that is particularly cool. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Just the idea of them being associated with the Republic, I'm not sure where I stand on that in terms of if that's like a key part of their downfall, or a big part of their problem or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's multiple factors. Like, I think their hubris and adherence to dogma is a factor. I do think them being like the iron hand of a government is also, being a militarized force serving the interests of a government, whether it's a just government or a flawed government or an evil government, either way, I think that is a flaw. And I think also, I think what this show and this episode was showing is that, like, even their adherence using, I guess this is the same thing as like the dogmatic elements, but like, using religious dogma as a guiding principle for their actions, and seeing other religions as inferior or flawed, I think is another part of it as well.
Yeah, certainly. Okay. Well, I guess I think a few minutes ago we were talking about how the show sort of is, so connected to the prequels and that kind of thing. And I was definitely like, whoa, what's going on here when it was revealed that the twins don't have a father. And, I mean, I guess that goes without saying to a certain extent, because they have two mothers, but, like, I just like was like, whoa, so are we doing an Anakin thing here? Is Qui-Gon going to pop up and be like, whoa, this is the prophecy of the chosen one? I hit my desk there, but like, what's going on with all of that? So then I found it really interesting when later on, there's the conversation between, Mother Anastasia and Mother Coral, where Mother Coral's like, hey, I get to be involved in this decision. I carried these children. Yeah. And, Mother Anastasia's like, I created them. And Mother Coral says, well, what happens if the Jedi find out how you created them? Mm-hmm. That was pretty interesting. So
that was compelling. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm certainly, I want to know more about that. Is it some kind of dark side element that, enabled that? Is there going to be any kind of possible connection to, let's say, Palpatine and the idea that he potentially manipulated midichlorians to create Anakin, which, I'm sure some people will say like, oh yeah, no, that's just a a harebrained theory or whatever, but Paul Duncan's Star Wars Archives, 1999 to 2005 or whatever years it is. George is in there talking about that. And I'm not saying that it's canon or that like that's ultimately what was decided, but it was certainly at least an idea that George was toying around with in the process of writing those movies, and something I think he ultimately chooses to leave ambiguous in the film rather than just give a direct answer to the question. But like it's pretty interesting, right? Is the actual creation is the actual creation of May and Osha a precursor to the creation of Anakin? And then what does the show ultimately have to say about that as as a choice or as a function, like whether that's good, whether that's bad, or whether it doesn't, make a moral judgment of it. I don't know, but like very, very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we need to have that direct connection to Anakin's story. I think, I mean, who knows? Maybe they will, but like, my God, if we get another like, hey, this also has to do with Palpatine thing, like from this show.
Palpatine doesn't even exist yet at this point.
Know.
He's not even born. The point that I'm making is like, I don't want a Star Wars galaxy or universe to exist where people are every 5 minutes whipping up children out of thin air with the Force or something. You know what I mean? I don't want this to be like, oh, it happens all the time. You know what I mean? So if the show, in the only real reference to this happening is like, oh, if the Jedi found out how you did that, like to me, that's opening it up very much to this is something dark. This is something that the Jedi would be like, absolutely not. This is not good. So if we see, on screen in this show or whatever, like we hear about in this show, a dark side power being used to create life, whether the show ever makes a direct connection or mention, I don't see how it even would mention Palpatine. Like he doesn't exist yet. Like the show's not going to be like, by the way, guys, this is what happened. But how can you not draw that connection as an audience member, as some, you know what I mean? How can you not make that connection if that's the road that this goes down in terms of how these two characters came to be?
I mean, maybe it will be, but I think like we're just already at like a point where, I mean, maybe it would help if these things were explained, but like it just, I don't know, like there's just all like the stuff with the Immaculate Conception of Anakin, and whether or not it was Palpatine, and then whatever the hell all that mess was in Rise of Skywalker, with Palpatine doing whatever to eventually become Rey's grandfather. I think like the further you can distance yourself from that stuff, the better. But I don't know. Maybe people want that, and
I like it okay. Personally, but I mean,
I think it also just goes back to that, like, a huge flaw that many people have with Star Wars is like, this idea that they make up a bunch of stuff in the movies and don't explain it, and then then it's like, watch all these TV shows and read all these books and stuff too, then it's like people trying to explain things after the fact and all of that. And I think like, I don't know, I'm very pro just letting some aspects of stories just exist in their own space.
Yeah, but I guess I'm struggling to see how, like, we know for a fact this show has told us today that these characters were created through some kind of, like, it wasn't a normal conception. We know that. So, like, that is already established. That's a fact that That is what the show already has
Mm-hmm.
done. Okay. So I'm not in any way suggesting that they are somehow going to explicitly draw this connection between what happened here and Palpatine creating Anakin. I'm just saying, like, do we want to call it thematically, or do you want to say like a motif or whatever? Like, we're playing with the same ideas now in this story, and to see where's it going to go in terms of like why do that, you know? Like, you don't sit down to write a show like this and go, I think I'll just have these characters be like an immaculate conception, you know what I mean? Like, there's got to be a reason, you know. There's something that they want to, there's something they ultimately want to do with this choice. And I feel like today it hinted at some kind of dark side element to it, and that just knowing what we know about, you know, this larger universe, and the fact that like the most important character in the entire Star Wars saga is also an immaculate conception. Like, just toss Palpatine out of the mix if you want to, but like, why are we now doing that again? Why are we drawing? It's impossible not to have a comparison or not to look for the connection there. And the show doesn't ever have to do anything more explicit than that. Like, they don't ever have to explicitly do anything with it. But to me, I'm just intrigued because, you know, this is something really a very important and powerful idea in the prequels. And now the show is choosing specifically to make a connection to it, you know, and I want to know where that's going to go. I'm very curious to see where that goes. And it can be super ambiguous and vague, but I want to see why are they doing this and what are they going to do with it, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it could just be witch stuff and like just, you know, they're I don't know, like, okay, there's witches are this it's a Filoni thing, right? Like
Yeah. Well,
so we didn't have witches.
Don't they show up in
Star
Dark
Wars.
Horse comics in like the mid '90s or something, and then George and Filoni pulled it out and put it in the Clone Wars, and that was when George was still part of it. I think so. I don't know. I think so.
Okay, well, witches are huge in Star Wars now. It's
Yeah.
it's Harry Potter 2 over here. We got all this witch stuff happening. I don't really know what goes on with that. It's a bunch of TV show episodes I don't like and don't ever want to rewatch. But there are these witches going to become like an offshoot or become what, like the witches of Dathomir or whatever?
So I don't know, but
like
yeah,
the start of it or something.
Yeah, it seems like maybe the Witches of Dathomir could be an extension or offshoot of this, right? I guess.
Okay.
In fact, Mother Coral, is she Dathmiri? Is that the term you would use to describe somebody from Dathomir? She looks like Darth Maul, doesn't she? She's got the horns and stuff. Is she the same species?
Is that what?
Yeah, Zabrak. Yeah. So is she from Dathomir? I don't know.
But are
yeah.
all people with those horns from there? And do all
Okay, well,
people
maybe
from
I
there
misspoke.
have those
Maybe it's not about
horns?
being from Dathomir, but I guess like
Okay.
Again, I go back to like thinking of it from the creative impulse. Hey, we're gonna have May's parents be witches. One of them is human or whatever, humanoid, whatever they call it in Star Wars. And the other one, we got to pick a race or, you know, an alien or whatever. I know, let's make it Dathomir, you know, or a Zabrak, just like a bunch of those, you know, like, why would you actually, you know, you don't slip on a banana peel and then, oh, well, she's a Zabrak like all those other Dathomir witches, right? I mean, that has to be intentional, I would think. So.
I don't know.
I mean, that's what makes sense to me, is that would be a choice that you would make, because otherwise it's like there's a lot of different, you know, types of people or aliens or whatever that you could use for that character, and you're choosing one that directly connects to the Witches of Dathomir, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can see the look on your face like, oh, I don't want it to be connected, but I mean, like,
I don't know. You know,
it's tough to believe that.
Well, okay, but you know, what I think then that kind of brings us to like the climax and conclusion of this episode, where we have May saying that, you know, if you're going to be a Jedi, I'm going to kill you.
Yeah.
And I'm setting our home on fire.
Yeah.
And then, you know, Osha escapes, and there's this fire that's like, you know, you obviously want to escape it, but it's not like everything is engulfed in flames. And then you have Osha leaving, and it's just piles of bodies.
Yeah.
Just stacks of them, like, everywhere. Yep. And there's like little trickles of flames in the background, but like no one's burnt up. Like there's no Uncle Owen, you know, fried type thing. It's like everyone's just like chilling, like laying down. There's no like people cut in half or like anything. It's just like everyone's just dead.
Yeah.
And it's very odd.
It's a mystery, I think, personally, and I have a couple little pieces of evidence that to me support this intentionally being depicted as like not adding up. You know what I mean? I don't think it's like well, we didn't have the budget to show anything happening, or you know, we couldn't figure out what. I don't think it's that. I think that there's much more to learn about this, and we don't know all the answers yet. And the reason I say that is a couple things. One, May sets fire to that her bedroom, or Osha's bedroom, right, or their bedroom, or whatever, and she gets out of there through some ingenuity and quick thinking and stuff. Whatever, that was cool. She gets out of there.
Some Mechnic stuff.
Yeah, some Mechnic stuff, that's right. And then, oddly, somehow their room is, like, real close via tunnel to the main reactor core or whatever of that temple or whatever that is, right? You expect Lando to fly in with the Millennium Falcon and blow that up at some point. But, so, like, she goes in there, and then that's, like...
Death Star?
That's like no, this would be a pre-Death Star, basically, right? Because we're behind in time. No, but like that's also like in the process of exploding or being on fire or whatever. But you see May is there, so it's like it could be just like weirdly setting fire to the bedroom, like was a domino thing that like set the reactor on fire. But then like seeing her there,
not on fire in between.
Yeah, but seeing her there makes it seem like, did she go there and also like try to destroy that or set that on fire? I guess what I'm trying to say is like I think it's suggesting a possibility that May didn't stop at just lighting the room on fire, but that she wanted to burn the whole place down. You know what I mean? And that's sort of how the Jedi have talked about it too. But again, it doesn't go so far as to like really tell us that or to like make that concrete. So I think that's up in the air. I think that's a possibility. I mean, I think it's like hinting at that possibility without coming out and saying that, right? May looks at Osha and says, "Mama's dead." And Osha responds, "What have you done?" And May says, "What have you done?" Right? They're just asking questions. Nobody's saying anything. Mama's dead, but like the dialogue is intentionally, we're not telling you how or why. You know, and Osha's like, "What have you done? Like, you're responsible for Mama being dead." And May doesn't deny it, but she also doesn't confirm it. So I don't know why Mama's dead, right? Then we have the piles of bodies, like you said, right? Why is everyone in the coven dead? I wrote down in parentheses, Jedi ? May ? I think the show is making it very mysterious in terms of, did the Jedi kill all those people? Did May kill all those people? Or was it some kind of like, somebody did something to start a conflict and then they ended up, you know what I mean? Like, I guess obviously the Jedi aren't dead and all those witches are, but you know, did the Jedi just come in there and start cutting everybody down? Did the witches attack them? I don't know. You know what I mean? We don't know what happened there, right? But the most interesting thing of all of it to me is when Osha wakes up on the ship with the Jedi, she asks what's going on, and a soul tells her, May started a fire, it killed. Right, so he's making a statement. May started a fire, it killed, and Osha cuts him off and says, "Mama, May," right? And Soul doesn't say anything. He does not confirm. He does not deny. Right, so we still don't know. We have no idea And I think like all of this stuff together to me is, whether it's well done or it's not well done or whatever, I think very clearly the intention is for us not to understand what happened, you know? So yeah. And I like that. I find that compelling. Now I want to know, like, why? Because I feel like the only reason to do that is because there's some kind of interesting wrinkle to all of this, you know? So we just spent this whole third episode going back in time so we could learn what happened that night, and we got so much information, and yet we still don't actually have the answers to the we don't have all of the answers. We don't have the most important answers to the question of like what happened back then, you know?
Yeah. And I think like there's when they have the bridge sequence when they're on both sides of the busted off bridge, and you know, like you were saying, what did you do? No, what did you do? Like it is like, okay, did May kill these people, or did Osha being aligned with the Jedi kill these people? And like, is that what May is blaming Osha for here? And yeah, I think all of that is good. I think a fire is turned out to be a terrible way of telling this story, because it, like, you know, you're trying to imply that there was, you know, something happened here. There's a mystery of like what happened to these people, but the way it is executed here, of like a few like tiny flames in the background, like it doesn't, it, there's no like it's obvious like a fire did not kill these people, but like you're supposed to be grappling with like, did May start a fire that killed these people, is like one side of it, but it's like obviously not. Like,
well, I think it's more about responsibility though, you know, like you were saying, like when they look at each other and it's like, what did you do? Because as you said, you know, Osha wanting to go with if Osha had been satisfied with being a witch, I mean, maybe not, because the Jedi do show up and knock on the door, but I think ultimately if Osha was satisfied with being a witch and did not want more, did not want to go out into the universe, the galaxy, or whatever, then probably none of this would have happened, right? But also, the other side of that is if May was not like, I'm going to murder you if you try to leave me, then probably none of this would have happened either, you know? Like, ultimately, if May doesn't set that fire, are all those people lying there dead? No, I don't think so. I don't think the fire is what killed them, but I think her starting that fire is why all of this destruction occurred. So, you know, I think it's ultimately like I don't know that it really matters if the fire is what killed the people or not. I think what matters is she started that fire, and that was the catalyst that led to all this destruction.
Yeah, but I think it does matter whether the fire killed those people or not, because like you have characters in the show being like, May started a fire that killed everyone.
Yeah, and we know that they're hiding things, and we know that the show is criticizing them for the way they're telling this story, you know? So
right,
like
but it they don't do a, like, you pretty much know, like, they don't do a good job with the mystery part of it, because it's like, well, obviously not. Like, obviously this fire did not kill anyone. Are you telling me that I'm supposed to believe that this fire killed people? Because you're, like, kind of showing me some dangerous fire, and then, like, then there's no fire, and then there's just people dead, and...
Yeah.
Like, I feel like the fire as one of the tools of death or whatever just isn't convincing in any way. I just, like, it's just such a messy sequence.
I see what you mean, but like, I guess to me it's like, am I as an audience member like it's one thing for me as an audience member to know that the fire didn't kill all those people, but I don't think that means that like 16 years later, 8 years later, whatever it is, when this is being discussed and they're like, well, May started a fire and everybody died. Like, I don't know that that means the characters within the universe or the story or whatever would all be like, that fire didn't do, you know what I mean? Like, there were, I mean, who was there when they talk about that? Who was there? It's May and Osha, and then it's the Jedi. Well, if the Jedi know the fire didn't kill everybody, why does it matter if they know that or not when they're talking about the fact that the fire killed people? Because they're obviously telling their side of the story. They're framing things the way they want it to be interpreted. So for me as an audience member to know, like, it's already not a mystery, I guess is what I'm trying to say. By the end of this episode, it's not a mystery as to whether or not the fire killed people. So it's fine for me if people who are intentionally shaping the narrative in a way they want it to be shaped are shaping it that way, because I don't have to believe them. You know what I mean? I don't believe them now because I've seen this and I know that that's not the answer.
But, like, Osha sees all this. And then, but, like, she seemingly easily buys into the idea that everyone was killed by a fire. When, like, she's walking through seeing these bodies and there's, like, no fire.
Well, that's true. That's true. Although, at the same time, like, her memory of that night is probably, I went into my room, my sister tried to murder me with fire. Then, like, and Sol even says in one of the previous episodes, like, she sees us as her protectors, right? So there's the scene where he reaches down and pulls her up and all that. And it's like, my sister tried to kill me with fire and then these Jedi saved me. But we also know that at some point, like, Osha chooses to leave the Jedi. Which there's got to be more to that too, which should be interesting, I feel like, to explore as the show goes on here also. But yeah, I guess that is a good point. Like, she should be asking a question there of like, why were all those bodies piled up like that? And she does kind of stop in that moment. It's like, whoa, I gotta, like, what's going on here? And then when she wakes up too, she's like, we have to go back. And Sol's like, there's nothing to go back to. They're all dead, right? And Sol's so convinced that May is dead too, which obviously isn't true. And like, what is the deal with that also? Because she falls down that pit, and then like in the very last shot of the episode, she's standing there looking at the tree, and I mean, she looks just as healthy as she did the day before, right? Like, I don't see, like, there's not a scratch on her really. So like, what happens there is another good question.
Yeah, and I think
could it be connected to whoever the bad guy is too? I don't know, but
and and like, that this kind of changes maybe some predictions about who that Sithish figure is. Like, is it Mother Coral? Because we don't see her body. She's not one of them. Whatever. And like, and I think, like, it obviously is meant to be mysterious. I just feel like in that last 10 minutes, like, the show just flubs every single, like, mystery there, like, in how it's executed. Like, I see what they're going for, but like, it's just, it's the challenge of of making mysteries, where they're like showing you so much, they want to show you enough as a viewer, but then like the characters are also seeing this, and then there's like this like major kind of disconnect, and then I don't know. Yeah, it did not work for me.
Didn't land for you. Gotcha. Reading the databank entry on StarWars.com today, I saw that the tree she's looking at there is a Bunta tree, and I kept hearing that, or not kept hearing it, but I heard it a few times. I was like, oh, like the Bunta Eve, right? But this is Bunta, so I guess it's a different type of Bunta. But it's a Bunta tree, and that is the leaf from that tree is what not Torben. What's the I forget the name of the guy who makes the poison. Who people are theorizing might be the Sith type character or whatever.
Yeah,
he makes it from the leaf from that tree. So just a little trivia there, world building. Yeah.
And I do think we should mention some of the other Jedi in this episode.
Yeah.
We've really only talked about Sol, but we do see Torben in his like non-catatonic state here. He also looks way more just like a normal dude and not like the weird huge hairline guy.
I was
he has
talking
much better hair in this episode.
I was talking to my friend Jeremy about the Acolyte last night for the first time, and he definitely made a comment about Torben and like Torben's appearance, and I was like, oh, what? Just because he had like fake beard, fake eyebrows, fake hair, fake everything, like, you know what I mean? And it makes a little more sense now. And we had seen footage in the trailers. I should have like figured that out, but like this is a situation where he's a younger actor and they had to make him look older, so they, you know, like, I don't think that was necessarily the way they had to do it, but that's what they chose to do, right? So yeah, he looks
certainly was a choice. But,
yeah, he looks definitely a little more normal in this one.
Yeah. I'm glad they didn't show this version of him first, or else it would have been. This was a glow up, and it would have been a major glow down. But he does do the just a prick kind of Qui-Gon thing of like time to check your midichlorians,
and he
kid.
sneaks some blood out of you without your consent.
Yeah, just very normal thing, sticking needles in people, and which was, you know, just like, yep, this is what the Jedi did. Qui-Gon was not rogue. When he did this to Anakin, this was the way. And then also, you know, same thing with like the little viewfinder, you know, iPad on a stick thing that that they used. But then we also
a speeder, a cup.
Yeah. A mountain. But then we also got to see the what is the Wookiee Jedi's name?
Kelnaka.
Yeah.
Kelnaka. Yeah.
We got to see him just like hanging out being a dude in this episode.
Yeah.
He is male, right? Is that?
I think so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we get to see him, and like there's I did really like the scene with when he was like doing some mechanic work, and Osha comes up and is like, "Oh, that looks cool. That looks like a cool thing to do." And he just like says something in Wookiees and
Shriwook.
Yeah. He says something, and she's like, "Oh, well, I gotta go take my test now." And so, like I did like that little moment, and I think that was, you know, that was a cute little moment. And then, you know, also knowing that maybe in the next episode, hopefully in the next episode, it's going to be May, going to kill this guy. But I think giving him like a little bit of a moment to just be like, just to be a dude, I think is good in like to get us more invested in his fate, knowing that May's gonna try to kill him, like, eventually.
So
I did like that, but I think, you know, this was an episode with some good moments, some good ideas, that was half an hour longer than it needed to be to tell this story is kind of my feeling on it. And I just was sitting there watching, just hoping that we would get to, you know, get back to the story, but also knowing that this was necessary and we knew it was going to happen, this kind of flashback thing, but it just went on way too long and had so many just awkward moments and some questionable direction here that it did not land for me. It was, I think this was kind of the first real miss for this show for me. So hoping this was just a one-off thing, and we get back on track.
Yeah. Yeah. It worked pretty well for me. I think, like I said, I just had the initial disappointment of I really wanted the story to keep moving forward, and I was excited about what happens next. And so, realizing then that this was all going to be just kind of giving us in more detail and filling in what had happened before was initially disappointing. But I think, I really liked, I think, is her name Jodie Turner Smith? I think it's her name, who plays Mother Anasea. I thought she was really, really good. Yeah, she was great, and I thought the Coven stuff was pretty interesting. Like, that's not the primary direction my Star Wars fandom goes in, like the witch stuff. You know what I mean? The Witches of Dathomir and all that. It's like not a major interest for me, but I did find it pretty interesting here, especially just the dichotomy between sort of the differences and the similarities between the dogma and the sort of rigidness of each group. I thought that was pretty interesting and compelling too. I hope that the next episode is back in the current day timeline, and I'm sure we're going to see I think we're going to see more footage, or whatever you want to say, more moments from this period of time before the show is over, because it didn't do enough to solidify, or I guess kind of like completely demonstrate what happened that night. So I think we will get another flashback at least, but I would not think it's necessary, or would not like to see another entire episode of flashback. I think we could get a scene or two, probably towards the end of the show, I would assume is how that'll work out. But yeah, so we'll see. But I guess that's my final thoughts on this episode. So I think we're ready to wrap it up, Ryan.
Yep.
Yeah. So we'll come back next week. We'll talk about episode 4. We'll see where that one lands with each of us. But until then, you can find all of our previous shows at blockaderunnerpodcast.com. If you want to share your thoughts on this episode, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us, blockaderunnerpodcast@gmail.com. You could interact with us on Blue Sky. The Blockade Runner podcast is on Blue Sky. Ryan, you're on Blue Sky too.
Yeah. Def Stan 480.
Yeah, Def Stan 480. Yeah, so, and we have our Discord also. I haven't checked the Discord this afternoon, so I don't think anybody's weighed in on this episode yet, but we're always chatting about the Acolyte and other things happening in Star Wars in the Discord. Actually, Ian shared in there yesterday. I think I texted it to you, Ryan, that we're getting some retro collection figures from the Acolyte from Hasbro later this year. So I was pretty excited about that, because I do like the retro collection figures, and I thought the Acolyte ones look really cool. So more on that in the future probably. But anyway, that's the kind of conversations and things that are going on in our Discord. So if you're a Discord user, we'd love to see you there. All right, so until next week, thanks very much for listening, and we will be back soon with another episode of the Blockade Runner podcast. Ryan, I'm waiting for you to start the chant. The power of one, the power of two, the